Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Kansas City-based jazz bassist Spencer Reeve. We caught up with this young, aspiring, and hungry player on the thriving Kansas City jazz scene. By way of Fresno, California, he came to the University of Kansas to learn under the veteran sage player Matt Otto. These days, he is playing jazz and more multiple nights each week in the Kansas City metro area and around the country at venues such as Jazz at Lincoln Center, Leid Center in Kansas, and the Green Lady Lounge along with Corvino Supper Club. Over 4 years, he has built a network of relationships all over town while curating a following of dedicated fans. It's quite a story. Enjoy.
Yeah, for sure. Well, man, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Of course.
So I would like to begin our conversation before we get into kind of your itinerary and your history and what's going on by asking you, 4 years ago, we were trying to figure this pandemic out. How are we going to get through it? How did you ultimately survive that time period as an artist, and how did it influence the way that you do things now?
Yeah. Well, it was an interesting time, I think, particularly for artists because, basically everything the entire way that I was making any money at all was gone, And so that's a little bit of a struggle in and of itself. And I was lucky to be around Matt Otto, actually, who helped me out in helping me get a place for way cheaper than it should have been. So I ended up, quarantined in this little house, essentially by myself for quite a bit of it. And, like everybody, the isolation was weird. But on the other side of things for musicians or artists in general, we kind of had this boon where it almost felt like a relief, where all of a sudden we had all this time to focus on the things that we got into music for and not necessarily the day-to-day grind of how am I going to make rent this month or whatever. And it felt liberating to me, being able to, I picked up playing the guitar for the first time actually during that period because, I felt like, why not? I don't need to grind every day shedding all this bass stuff for all these gigs I have lined up. I could just do whatever. And yeah, it really did. I felt like it brought me back. It realigned me with my intention from the beginning and being a musician. So.
Well, the interesting thing about you saying that is that I think there was this level of everybody coming to this crossroads in their lives of figuring out what was important and how you were going to carry forth. And I think that was kind of a good crucible for all of us to carry because it just refined what we really wanted as we moved on.
That's totally true, yeah.
So let's get into what's going on with you right now. As we mentioned up front, you were at the Westport Coffee House with the big band of Drew Williams, which was a wonderful night of music. So many cats in that band. So talk to me a little bit about what you're doing right now on the scene here in Kansas City.
It's and I think this is true for a lot of bass players. It's a little scattered. I've got quite a range of things I end up doing these days. After spending time in college, certainly I would say my main focus was jazz and definitely on the upright. And I spent a while still in the scene pretty focused on that. But nowadays I'm kind of spreading out to doing more things. In the jazz world, my main guys I play with nowadays are Henry Skamura and Isaiah Petrie, who are also young people like me. Those are the main cats I play with because, I love their approach. I love that they're fresh. They're not super, not to dog on tradition or anything. That stuff's great, but I love that I can approach their music like original pieces of music more than approaching it like jazz in the greater context of all history or whatever. And so, jazz-wise, that's the main stuff I'm doing, but I'm playing with all kinds of artists on electric bass in quite a range of genres. So,
but all of that together is kind of, I think, the way that the modern music is heading. I mean, from Kamasi Washington to all these other cats, it's like they're approaching this art form the way that Miles Davis evolved later in his life.
Totally. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I think that's a huge inspiration for me. I always thought it's funny, when I was younger, and obviously we were all into Miles Davis, which is why we like jazz now, but I remember, I think even before I knew anything about Kind of Blue and all these older albums, I was listening to, Miles Live Around the World at like 1981. And I loved that stuff. And I found it kind of surprising as I got older and realized a lot of people stopped caring about what Miles did after, the 70s or even the 60s for some people. And realizing that it's a bit ironic. And so, yeah, I feel glad that a lot of younger people are, in general, in the jazz scene are getting back to the roots of, like, the intent behind jazz and the intent behind the music and the improvisation rather than maybe necessarily the notes themselves that people used to play, So.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why I ask about the pandemic up front, because it was almost like a bebop moment for the music. It was a place for people to say, this is what I want to do now. And it doesn't have to be beholden to history. It has to be beholden to the fact that we have this creative spirit. And quite frankly, when jazz was really kind of the popular medium back in the day, things were different. We were in World War II. There was all this uncertainty. There was these dictators. There was things that were happening that were just kind of a part of us being a young country. And the African American population that was really still coming out of being jilted by societal demands and just really, really bad things happening. And now we're at a point where, I think jazz is responding in another way to things that are going on that are clowny and weird in our political situation. And just overall finding that I think everybody that's in the jazz scene right now that's young had to fight to be there, because everybody could have bowed out from an art form that just generally doesn't pay that much. And you're paying an enormous amount of money to go to school to get this degree.
Yeah, I consider myself I consider myself pretty lucky in general. A lot of stuff wasn't going as badly for me during that time as it could have been and as it was for a lot of people. And so I had the option to keep making art, and I think that's really lucky for me. But you're right. Music has always come from, that type of, when you're at a crossroads or you're going through some struggles and stuff like that, and art has always come out of that place. And certainly historically jazz and basically all of Western music is, Black music and Black American music, and the struggles that they've faced was what created everything. And the same could be said, I believe, for queer people have always been at the center of all art in our country, the whole time. And I think that's a big part of it. And we saw, the effects of people, of the pandemic on people of color and queer people, and ended up being exaggerated. And I think it mirrors what the history has always done. And so, all the artists, responding to that in the way that they know how is the way music keeps getting pushed forward,
And I kept feeling during the pandemic that it was if people that were creative couldn't find that spirit to do it, then they probably shouldn't be doing it. That was the Bob Dylan moment for everybody. I don't know. I'm 51, and in my lifetime, I don't know that I've seen a mass repeal of rights for so many people on such a widespread basis. Even women, just to get basic health coverage. It's so weird that we've rolled this back, and this is the time, because artists have always been historically the ones that have had that bigger voice to say, hey, let's stop. Well, let's figure this out.
Yeah, it's more important than ever, that's for sure.
So let's get to the beginnings of this music for you. Take me back to where you were born and raised, and how initially did music become what you've focused on in your life, and how did jazz get in there?
Well, so I grew up in Fresno, California, for, 18 years of my life or so. And my dad is a musician. He's a guitar player, and he's always liked a bunch of different kinds of music. He's always liked jazz to a degree. When I was real young, he wasn't quite as strongly on the jazz train yet himself, but he had always, he grew up loving Kiss and Van Halen and Led Zeppelin and all that stuff. So I got into that at a young age, and I loved watching my dad play guitar. That was always fun. So he got us started playing, my sister and I, playing piano pretty young, and for whatever reason, I just didn't like it. And I begged and begged and begged him to let me quit. And finally, he made a deal with me that he would let me quit piano as long as I picked a different instrument. And at the time, I wanted to play drums. So he, I'm real thankful, and my parents being so supportive. But yeah, he helped me find somebody who was willing to teach me drums at, I think I was probably 5 years old or 6 years old. And so, that's kind of where my music playing started. I played for a long time just drums, and picked up the electric bass around 9 years old. And then only about a year or two after that, picked up the upright, and kind of never looked back from there. I really got into jazz through once my dad had kind of introduced me to it. It wasn't necessarily my thing, but I met at a music camp actually one summer when I was probably 13. I met my now mentor. His name's Richard Giddens. He's a great player. He grew up in Fresno as well, and then when he was young, moved out to New York and started playing there. He ended up playing with the band Stomp, if you've heard of them.
Yeah.
So he played with them for years, toured with them, and he had a lot of success. Met a lot of people, played with a lot of cool people in New York. Came back to Fresno to kind of be around his family again, and to I think try to find the next step for his career as he was getting older, performing wise. Was he wanted to find something else, I think, and luckily I met him, and he kind of took me under his wing. He had studied with Charlie Hayden, who's one of my favorite bass players of all time, for a period of time, and so initially I immediately knew that I wanted to learn from him. And it ended up really changing my life. I mean, it was because of not only him teaching me, but him just teaching me about life and not just bass. It changed everything. And he's why I'm out here now. He's why I'm, still playing and doing everything I am. Yeah, really, really influential person on me, that's for sure.
So what was the first live, both concert generally and jazz specifically, that you saw that blew you away?
That's a little hard to pinpoint exactly. My memory's not the best. I will say certainly jazz related, somewhat jazz related is the concert where I realized I wanted to play the bass. My dad took me to a jazz festival near Fresno, and I saw, let me think of that band's name, Sarah Negro. It was a kind of a local band in that area, and they played all sorts of music. They had a member that was a Brazilian. She's a Brazilian musician, and so they played some Brazilian music, and they played a little bit of Afro-Cuban music. The bass player was I believe he was Puerto Rican. I actually can't remember, but anyway, the bass player just blew my mind as a 8 or 9 year old, and that really changed my life. Other than that, my dad was very into local music, so I didn't necessarily see a lot of these big artists or anything like that, but I ended up going to see the people in town, and I think that's what really got me excited for sure.
So let's hone in on your trek to the Midwest from Fresno. Mm-hmm. What ultimately brought you here, and what kind of culture shock was it for you to come from the West Coast to the Midwest?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. So I came here originally because, like I said, my mentor, Richard, he was good friends with Matt Otto, who teaches at KU. And when I was getting ready to go to college, I actually didn't go to school for music. I was dead set on going to school for physics, which is what I ended up doing. But he was not very happy with that, Richard. He wanted me to study music or at least keep playing, which I agreed. I wanted to keep playing. But he essentially at one point told me he would be happy if I had applied to a bunch of schools. He said, I'd be real happy if you ended up at KU with Matt, and I took that to heart a little bit. Also, I wanted to get out of there. I was young and I needed to stretch my legs a little bit. And so I applied to KU and early access, got in 3 days later, and just accepted before I had heard back from anywhere else. So, you know, it kind of signed, sealed, and delivered, I guess. Yeah, and when I got out here, basically the only guy I knew was Matt Otto, and only just barely. And it was surprising for sure. A lot of things I didn't know about this place, and especially moving into Lawrence was interesting because it is sort of, you know, that it's a bubble for sure, and Casey is as well. In the surrounding area, it was surprising. Yeah, lots of little things, but also surprising some of the similarities too, and some of the overlooked beauty of this place, the middle of the country that I think a lot of, you know, I never heard about as growing up in California.
So are you happy being here, or are you looking to get back to California? Where are you at right now?
You know, I love KC, and for now I'm sticking around. I think well, I wouldn't mind getting back to California eventually, but also that's a hard thing to do. It's easy to get out, not easy to get back in. So it's
yeah.
still there. So you know, hearing from my friends who are playing in LA, and a lot of my friends now are starting to come up in that scene, and it's just it sounds brutal. And when I compare it to the amount of work that has to get done to make a living and do your thing as a musician, you know, here it's pretty. At this point in my life, I can't see a world where I would rather live in somewhere like LA or whatever. But I don't know, we're pretty lucky out here in KC in a lot of ways, but also, you know, every city has its ups and downs, you know. So.
Yeah, you know, Michael Carr came to Kansas City. He's a singer and a saxophone player. Really great cat, but he came here from California a year ago.
Yeah.
Just literally packed up and came over, and he loves it. He absolutely loves it. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, it's a great city. I really do love it here. Lots of art.
Well, that's the thing that's surprising about Kansas City is you get kind of pigeonholed in the Midwest thinking you're a cow town and, you know, you don't have a lot going on. I mean, we have St. Mahomes on his magic horse that brought a dynasty here. But,
yeah.
You know, other than that, it's like people kind of have this stereotype, but Kansas City really does have a very supportive art scene. And that's the thing I think people don't realize even with the jazz. It used to be a springboard. People would graduate with Bobby, UMKC, sure, and then go to the coast. But now it's like people are coming here, and this is a destination.
It is. I mean, I think the economic situation in the world right now is helping, you know, push that because, you know, despite, you know, obviously Kansas City getting getting more expensive super quickly, it's still significantly cheaper than so many of the other art cities, I suppose, around the world, especially in the U.S. So, you know, we're in a unique position. And I think if we, like you said, we already do take care of artists, I mean, relatively well if you're comparing to other cities. But if we can, as much as possible as a community, keep doing that and even grow that, I think KC has a real big, real exciting future. That's for sure.
So what do you like the best about living here in Kansas City? I mean, in general and with the scene of musicians?
You know, I think as far as the music goes, I mean, it's the art in general. I think I've rarely seen a community that is so good at multimedia collaborations and collaborations between artists and so many people who are interested in it. And now, you know, I haven't been here for very long, so I don't know if this is a phase or if it's new or if that's always how it's been, but it really astounds me. I mean, I was just a great artist friend of mine, Mazzy Mann, she just finished putting on a play that she wrote, which is, you know, a little out of her wheelhouse as far as what she's been doing up to this point. You know, she's an experimental improvised music person, and she's been doing that for a long time, a little bit of theatrics, but, you know, this play just, I mean, it inspired me so much. I helped play in the pit, but it inspired me seeing all these different types of artists as far as like set builders and actors and, you know, writers and, you know, cooks and, you know, just so many different artists coming together. It really blows my mind, and I haven't seen stuff on that scale happen in other cities. But, yeah, I mean, it's underrated, the beauty out here, really, like just the physical beauty. And summer's a great time to see it, just all the green, and I don't know.
So talk to me a little bit about influences. Who have been kind of perennial influences, especially from the world of jazz, and who has evolved into being like local influences for you in your playing and what you're doing here in Kansas City?
Yeah, I already mentioned Charlie Hayden. It's hard to find, as far as bass players, I'll start there. For the upright, Charlie Hayden through and through. I mean, he's incredible. Larry Grenadier is another one that I love. Really tone-wise, I'm really obsessed with sound on the upright, and less with, a lot of the other stuff, which Pete's there, but that's my obsession, and those are the guys to me that have it. As far as electric bass, I really love Tim LaFave. He played on the Black Star album, David Bowie's last record, and with a million other people. He's really great. But, as far as throughout my life, I mean, other than my direct teachers, I mean, Matt Otto is the guy who brought me here, so he's clearly been pretty influential. And, in this city, I have been real lucky to be welcomed and accepted by people who, are colleagues of mine, and I'm glad are colleagues of mine now. I'm proud to be colleagues with people, but people who, have been great teachers and great mentors and helping me navigate this city, especially being new. People like Eddie Moore, he's, indispensable and has been indispensable to the community for the last, however long he's been here, I think, 10, 15, 20 years, something like that. But he's really incredible, Even some of my younger peers like Isaiah Petrie and Jalen Ward and Ben Turbert, these younger cats on the scene have also been influential to me in the way that playing with them changes how I see music. And I don't know, I think I try to look at my influences not just as, these artists who I admire to sound like and play like, but also like the people in my community that are super helpful, and I aspire to be as great and welcoming as these people in Casey have been to me. So,
the one thing about Kansas City is that we have this rich lineage of jazz history, being one of the cradles, along with New Orleans and New York. There's a lot of history. What does that ever come into your mind when you are on the bandstand with these musicians that are really like with Drew and Matt and people that are etching a new lore here in Kansas City? What does all that mean to you?
Yeah, it's definitely a heavy thing, and that's it's a good point because it's something that's very different from the environment was on the West Coast. The history here runs deep, and it's amazing because it's kind of everywhere you look. And I think a lot of people who grew up kind of in the Midwest and the East Coast take this for granted, but all these buildings are old buildings. I'll be playing on stages that these stages have been around for 100 years. The city is just old, and jazz or otherwise, it just has cultural history that was totally not there on the West Coast. And that is reflected in people's attitudes and people's decisions and the way they think about music. And that's been a big learning thing for me, and something I still kind of fight with here and there. I think there's a balance to be had, but, a lot of the people here can get so obsessed with tradition, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, that they sort of lose sight of the really raw, creative, the voodoo shit, the stuff that you have as a person. Whereas on the West Coast, I saw a lot of people so obsessed with this personal, individualistic idea of music that they lose all cultural relevance because they just ignore that. And I think there's certainly somewhere in between that's the place to be for sure. But yeah, it's amazing. I still, I've only been around here for a few years, so it's still something that I'm slowly navigating and finding out about the history here. And it really is a cool aspect. There's lore and there's something magical about that, that history.
So speaking of that history, if you could get transported in a time machine back to 18 and Vine back in the day and see one musician from that era, who would you love to have seen play with your own eyes?
That's tough. That is hard. If I had to choose one. Man,
I guess you could start, since there were so many, it was so flush back then, I guess you could start at one and kind of work your way down the line to a few others.
Sure. Well, I mean, just back in the day, I've always wanted to see Mingus. And, I know he wasn't necessarily a local around here, but he's a huge, figure in the music. And, obviously I would be remiss without saying anything about Bird. That would be pretty incredible. But, I also find there's something about that idea of like going back in time. I think any of us would like to go back and be able to see these legends that we didn't have the chance to see. But I think I would even go as far to say like we can go back 10 years and try to check out what's going on over here. Especially for me as someone who I wasn't around here 10 years ago, and I want to see Bobby Watson in KC 10 years ago, and I want to see Logan Richardson, 10 years ago as a young person playing here, and to that point, I feel lucky that I think there are some equivalent versions of that, people that I'm seeing young here now that, in the next 10 years, we're all going to be talking about how lucky we are that we saw them when they were young playing in KC, So,
yeah, for sure. So at the end of the day, why do you love jazz?
I think the reason I always have loved it is the community and the history behind it, really. The freedom. It's the history of self-expression, and it's a super communal art form, people working together. And I think it really epitomizes what's great about being a person and being, making music, making art, is the beautiful combination of self-expression juxtaposed with a sense of duty and a sense of responsibility and loyalty with your fellow musicians. There's a democratic nature to being up on stage with people, and you're not just self-expressing, you're also you're there to help people out, and that's part of what I love about being a bass player. I think that's what it is to be human. It's really a mirror.
So, Spencer, at the end of the day, everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, everyone that sees you perform. You ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, that's tough. I think these days I'm a little bit of an explorer, I would say. I'm not, at least as far as I can tell, maybe others have a better idea, but I haven't really pinned down myself what exactly form the music and art that I'm intending to make with my life will go in, what the direction it's going to go in. So I feel like I'm trying to take as much time these days to explore a bunch of different avenues, and I hope that what people get when they hear me play is that no matter which avenue I'm taking, I'm trying to be a supportive player. I'm trying to support the other musicians as much as possible, and I'm trying to support the audience in, having a good time and dancing or whatever it is, as much as possible. That's what I aspire to anyway.
So what about recordings? Any projects, anything coming up for you?
Yeah, so I'm getting close to releasing a single, actually, which is funny. I never expected I would get to this point, really, but yeah, at some point I decided to just record this single. It's a little unique. It's not quite my normal jazz bag of tricks, but it's a song I wrote during the pandemic, and that's going to be probably coming out in the next couple months, so hopefully people stay tuned for that. But I'm also part of Henry Skamura's project, Urban Forum. That album's coming out pretty quick here. I was on that album. A good friend and collaborator of mine, Delima Captain, has an album coming out. She's a great singer-songwriter, jazz adjacent for sure, and that's a record I was on. That's coming out in the next, I think, 2 months. Let me see, am I missing anything? No, I think those are the main projects that I've got coming out here pretty soon. So
cool. So if anyone wants to catch you live, check you out on a website or on socials, where's the best place for people to catch up with you?
Probably the best place would be my Instagram. That's at Reeve Singular, or I think there's a period in there somewhere, at Reeve period singular. I've got a website. It's mostly a joke. It's pretty funny, but it doesn't have a lot of helpful information. But anyway, I always post on my Instagram what I'm up to. I tend to be at the Westport Coffee House quite often these days, so that's a good bet.
Right on. This has been great. Hey, man, it's great to meet you, Spencer. Thank you for taking a minute out to the show. Best of luck with everything. I look forward to seeing this all grow.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise, it was a good time.
Thanks for listening and tuning into another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Fresno, Lawrence, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Spencer for swinging on by the show. If you want to hear more Neon Jazz interviews, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to us at YouTube, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to theneonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.